Hi, my name is Brady. I'm going to talk about politics. Today I want to talk about the oil and gas industry and what's been happening with gas prices and oil production and that sort of thing. Um, there's been a trend in the United States all the way through the past 20 years. There's been a major pivot. During the Bush administration, he really wanted to produce more oil so that we didn't have to be reliant on other countries. And our U.S. oil production has been going up steadily ever since then, all the way through the Obama administration, all the way through the Trump administration, and into the Biden administration. We've been doing more oil over and over. We did take a hit in 2020 because of COVID, but I'll get to that. That set the oil industry back quite a bit. But moving back a little bit, back in 2014, there was a fairly serious negotiation between the Obama White House and the Saudi Arabians. And we were able to talk them into producing a little bit more oil. And during the course of that negotiation, they ended up, they at the time were producing more oil than any other country on the planet, and their production increase helped drop oil and gasoline prices across the country. By 2016, we'd had the lowest gas prices we'd had since before the Iraq War, since all the way back in the first term of Bush. It was really good gas prices at the time, but that didn't stay that good though. As soon as it wasn't able to stay steady at that rate, gas prices kind of wobbled a little bit higher in the first 2 years of the Trump administration. The Trump administration wanted to do something about it. They wanted to bring it down. They saw how in 2016 the good gasoline prices really helped Democrats in their election efforts, and they really wanted that same kind of effect on their side. So Donald Trump had been pestering Saudi Arabia and to up their oil production again to help the United States out. But Saudi Arabia already felt like they'd already helped out all they were going to. They're just out of the goodness of their heart. They wanted something in exchange. They wanted some tangible benefit. So the Trump administration came up with this idea. They told the Saudi Arabians, "We don't trust Iran. You guys hate Iran too. So what we want to do is we want to we want the United States to stop buying oil and gasoline from Iran entirely. Cut them off, cut them off the legs, leave them, deprive them of that. That will hurt their economy. It will help yours in the long run. But to do that, we need you to raise your oil production to cover that. So we can cut the Iranian production without it hitting our economy and destroying us. So help us do this big blow against Iran. Help us screw them over." And Saudi Arabia's like, "I love that idea. We hate Iran. They suck." Saudi Arabia and Iran both claim to be the rightful heirs of the Caliphate, the great Muslim and Arabic nation that, not Arabic necessarily, but the great nation that all Muslims should be inspired by. Everyone else in the world thinks they're both wrong, but they both say, "We're the good ones and you suck." So they hated each other desperately for decades. But so Saudi Arabia was looking for this chance to screw Iran over. They liked that idea. Also, the Saudi Arabians had gotten in trouble for killing. The Saudi royal family had gotten a New York Times reporter executed. They tricked him into coming to a place for a story, and they just straight up murdered him, and they got caught red-handed with it. His name was Jamal Khashoggi. I'm not good at names. Sorry, that might be pronounced wrong. But Jamal Khashoggi was just murdered in cold blood by either on the. I don't think it was directly by, like, with their bare hands, the Saudi royal family, but it was under their orders. So that was a huge scandal, and everyone expected the United States to nail him on that. So it's thought maybe that Trump also said, "We'll forgive this if you help us screw over Iran." I don't know if they actually did that. I haven't been able to find proof that they did that, but it's certainly the timing fits. Anyway, they definitely had this plan. Let's help us screw over Iran. And Saudi Arabia's like, great. They upped their oil production. It helped with the gas prices. And then the United States said, just kidding. We're going to keep buying oil from Iran too. Now that we've got oil coming in from both countries, oil and gas prices went down. And you can actually see in the graph of U.S. gasoline prices did go down for several months after that. But the Saudi Arabians were absolutely pissed, felt betrayed for obvious reasons. They were misled into this plan. So they were upset. They probably didn't reverse. They might have just not reversed it because of the Jamal Khashoggi thing. If they pissed off the United States at that exact moment when the world was ready to be pissed at Saudi Arabia, they were vulnerable. So there wasn't a lot they could do in that moment. But they certainly were not looking to do any favors to the United States anytime soon. Uh, Also, that massive oil production coming out of Iran and Saudi Arabia at the same time, that did bring down gasoline prices and oil prices, but that also hurt U.S. oil companies because the price of oil had dropped, and so they were making less money per barrel of oil. That financial loss helped drop them into kind of a precarious situation. And people that oil and gas companies that were already struggling, a few of them went out of business. Bankruptcies spiked in 2018 and especially in 2019. And not a great situation. The oil and gas industry was like, Trump had this reputation of being pro-oil, and even under this great pro-oil president, we're still suffering. This seems like the beginning of the end for the oil industry. If even the people who want us to succeed are knocking us around and making life harder for us, that sounds like there's just no way to get ahead anymore. So they were starting to get very discouraged. Then COVID hit, which made it so much worse. In early 2020, we started having travel bans and lockdowns, not just in the United States, but across the world. And because people weren't traveling as much, oil and gasoline is used almost just predominantly for transportation. So all of the jet fuel, all the gasoline, all the diesel fuel to move ships and planes and cars around, all wasn't happening. The demand for it had gone way down, which made prices drop precipitously. We actually had negative oil prices for a while. We had so much oil in storage that it was becoming difficult and expensive to find more places to store oil. They were actually storing oil on giant oil tanker ships, just sitting in the docks, sitting in the bay, because there was nowhere else to put it. They weren't even shipping it anywhere. They just needed it in a container. And so they just used the massive shipping containers just as storage tanks. We had way too much oil everywhere. It was getting so expensive to find somewhere to store it. The United States actually rented out storage space that they normally would use for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. They were actually selling out space in those storage tanks to private oil and gasoline owners just for a place to store it. And all of that expense actually made it more expensive to store oil than you could get for selling it. So people were just desperate to sell it. The price actually went negative. It was actually worse to have oil than to have nothing. This was an actual genuine crisis, and probably the best thing that Donald Trump's administration did in their entire oil and gas policy platform throughout their entire term was that they decided that this wasn't a time to keep pounding on the low oil and gas prices issue. It wasn't a time to just keep pushing that ideology. They had to adapt to circumstances, and we needed to save the oil and gas companies so that we wouldn't suddenly go back on Bush's dream of being oil independent and end up being completely dependent on the Middle East again. They didn't want to lose that. So they decided to push for a deal, an international deal, to cut oil and gas production to match the reduced oil and gas demand. So if demand goes down and supply doesn't, supply gets worthless. But if demand and supply go down together, then you can keep the oil and gas industry afloat. Everything's still working. So the international community, all the countries of the world, all the oil producing countries, which the United States technically didn't qualify for yet because our oil production was relatively new. We hadn't really been integrated. So it's all the other oil producing countries besides the United States are members of this organization called OPEC+. OPEC is like the center group that's mostly the Middle East, with also Russia and the oil producing countries that are just like the core in the Middle East that produces most of the world's oil. But then OPEC Plus also includes Mexico and Ukraine and oil and gas producing countries in Africa. Nigeria is a big one. Oil and gas producing countries all over the world are all part of OPEC Plus, except the United States, because we're still new. We haven't organized with it. We also just kind of don't play well with others. We don't join other people's international organizations very much. So we just haven't got around to it yet. We only recently qualify. We just haven't tried. So every country in OPEC Plus wants the global oil production to go down so that oil is worth something again. And after oil production goes down and oil is worth something again, they want to be the ones left with oil everywhere. Everywhere. They want tons of oil personally so they can still sell it at this great profit after the prices get good again. But the only way they can lower global oil production is if every country reduces it. If every country does it, if one country doesn't do that, that country is going to have tons of oil and be able to sell it at great prices, and they're going to make buckets of money. So everyone wants to be that one special country that's the exception, and nobody wants to, like, everyone wants everyone else to cut oil production, but nobody wants to cut their own oil production. So it's kind of this standoff. And they were negotiating, they were trying to figure it out, but Donald Trump decided to take personal responsibility for this. And this genuinely, in my opinion, is the best thing that Donald Trump did in his entire term in office, is he decided that he was going to get personally responsible and make sure this deal happened. They were aiming for a target of cutting 10 million barrels of oil per day of oil production. They wanted to drop it down and then keep it down for a long time and just like gradually bring it back as oil demand came back, as people were traveling again and lockdowns ended and people could get back out in the world again. So Donald Trump gets involved and he negotiates hard. He's always prided himself on his negotiation skills, and he was putting this to the test now. He wanted to prove that he was the man for the job. And to his credit, he actually succeeded. He got this deal signed. This is, in my mind, the greatest accomplishment of his entire term. Not just in oil and gas policy, but in everything the Trump administration did. This, in my opinion, is his greatest success, is that he got a deal signed. The terms, he didn't quite get the 10 million that was the goal that OPEC wanted to get, because he negotiated, they were trying to get Mexico to drop their production as well as with everyone else. But Mexico felt like their oil production, their oil industry was still fragile and new and was kind of wobbly. And they were worried that if they cut that oil production that much, enough companies would go out of business that they wouldn't be able to get it back up afterwards. And Donald Trump actually advocated for them. They said, what if Mexico and the United States had one collective cap? So if they can't cut their oil production enough, maybe we could cut our oil production enough to match and cover the part they can't do. And Donald Trump sacrificing for Mexico is just wildly out of character, but he actually did offer that. It didn't end up being accepted. They ended up just reducing how much Mexico was expected to drop the oil production. That's where we lost 300,000 barrels per day of oil production from our goal. They didn't get the 10 million, they got 9.7 million. They just cut that little bit because they just made it less strict on Mexico, and that got the deal signed. That was the last detail to get the deal in place. And that OPEC Plus deal really did save oil industries in every country across the world. It would have been a very serious disaster. It's fantastic that it got signed. The terms of it, though, were that it was going to last for 2 years, and it was going to be in 3 phases, where the first phase, they're going to keep oil production all the way down. They're going to cut what it was for now down to 9.7, down by 9.7 billion, 9.7 million with an M, barrels of oil per day. That's the biggest cut in human history. It's about 10% of total global production. That was going to save the industry. And then they were going to keep it there for a while and then pop it back and then like raise the restrictions a little bit. So they didn't have to cut it quite so much anymore. Then keep it at that level for a while and then bring it back up to about half of that cut. And then we're going to hold it there for a little while. And that third phase was going to end exactly 2 years after the deal was signed. The deal was signed in mid-April of 2020. The deal was going to expire in mid-April of 2022. And that oil deal is what turned the oil industries, the oil prices around, brought them back up into marketability, and people aren't going to go bankrupt. Some people went bankrupt. A few oil gas companies still went bankrupt, but way fewer than it would have been otherwise. And it didn't hit. The United States ended up being that one country that didn't sign the deal, that wasn't part of the deal. So that idea where every country wanted to be that special exception, we got that. The United States got that and was the special exception. And because we got that special exception, our oil and gas production has been going up ever since that deal was signed. We lost some production before that. We took a little while before we started turning it around, but we've been bringing our oil production up ever since that. And it's up higher than it was before COVID now, and it still is going higher even today. We benefited so much from that deal. It did have a side effect, though. It was in place for 2 full years. And the first 6 months, we had lockdowns. Then the lockdowns ended, and demand for oil started coming back. People were traveling again. People were going to work. People were flying to other countries. For people that work for the travel for work, we're traveling for work again. People were even starting to do a little bit of tourism. So things were starting to come back a little bit, and the production was starting to come back. But we had that glut of oil that we've been storing everywhere. We could use that for a while. So the prices didn't go shooting up yet. We still had enough oil to cover everything. And it's just people didn't have to store it at these exorbitant rates anymore. They could sell it off and get balanced out again. They could end up producing to match what consumers were buying, and they were back in the regular routine of selling rather than in a crisis mode of, wow, we've got way too much oil, what are we going to do with it all? So that allowed them to start drilling again and start to get back into things. But after that oil glut sold out, demand was still coming back, but the global oil production was still capped by that international agreement. It couldn't go above this line, but demand could. And that mismatch is what started raising gas prices. Especially it hit in about spring of 2021, and it spiked hard all the way up to, it peaked out at summer of 2022 at a little bit over $5 a gallon of gas in the United States. Both gasoline and oil, and any petroleum product that's produced from crude oil, all the prices all shot up, including plastics even were getting more expensive. But the deal expired in April. By June, it had peaked, and within like a year to 18 months after that peak in June of 2022, by 2023 fall, the prices had gone down $2 a gallon of gasoline since that summer peak. So it really was that OPEC Plus deal that had spiked the gasoline prices. I should mention that Biden did have some election promises about trying to cut oil, trying to get the United States off of oil. Like, he treated it like an addiction that he wanted to change. And he did make a lot of rhetoric about that. He signed some executive orders about it. But ultimately, all of that got reversed when gas prices started going up, and it just never really had any effect on oil production. Our oil production kept going up all through that era, and it just didn't cause the high gasoline prices. There's some respects to which the oil and gasoline companies had been going through hard times for years, and they were looking for a time where they could start making money again. So there was a sense in which they raised their profit margins because they'd been in a tight spot for so long. They wanted a little bit of relief. They did a little bit less investing in the future and more investing in now and short-term profits, just to kind of release all that pressure they've had from all the way since 2018. They've just been in crisis mode, and it was just nice to get comfortable finances again and get back into their comfort. So a little bit of the gas price increase then was just the timing of it, that oil and gas companies were like, okay, we can finally make our profits, let's do it now while we can. And so there was some of that. But ultimately, both, when they were getting hit so hard by both the pro-oil and the anti-oil politicians, they just felt like, well, we're just going to be hit by politicians forever. That's just the new normal. There's no way we're going to get out of it. So they just are looking for profits now. Just the future just isn't as distant as it used to be. People are switching over to electric vehicles. We're getting a lot more. People are trying to avoid plastics for environmental reasons. It's just, in general, the petroleum industry is probably going to shrink over the next 20, 50 years, something like that. And because the oil industry is kind of seeing its heyday pass, even though we're producing more oil than we ever have, it feels like the clock is winding down. And so they're looking to get their profits now because they can't rely on those profits being there forever. So they're just looking for what comes next. There's a lot more investment by the oil and gas industry into renewable energy now because they're looking for They're looking to get involved in what's next and make money off of what's next. We also, the drop of gasoline prices after summer of 2022, it was going down for a good long while. It finally turned around because of, at first it kind of hesitated a little bit because Putin invaded Ukraine. That cut off petroleum exports from both of those countries, and it kind of tightened the market from that. So that brought prices back up a little bit. And then we also got hit with all of the unrest in the Red Sea with the Hamas attack on Israel, and then Israel fighting back against Gaza in a brutal way. The Arab world that produces a lot of the world's oil throwing a fit about that, being very upset, and Houthi rebels in Yemen shooting rockets and missiles and sending drones out to attack ships that were going through there. That cut off a lot of the shipping. It made it hard to get oil out of the Middle East to the rest of the world. That helped bring up gasoline prices a little bit too, oil and gasoline prices. But all of those factors involved, the relief that we got out of the end of the OPEC Plus deal just stopped being the primary factor in oil and gasoline prices anymore, starting about late 2022, early 2023. And now we're on the international events are running it again. It's not COVID exclusively. It's not that oil deal so powerfully anymore. It's just day-to-day chaos around the world. Oil producing companies trying to get oil to where it's needed. That is my little summary of the oil and gas industry over the past decade or so. If you want more sources that have really good information about what's been happening in the oil and gas industry, I've got some sources to recommend to you. There's a website that has public information, the same way that if you want to know the unemployment rate, you go look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. If you want to know oil and gas statistics, how much are we importing, how much are we exporting, how much is Russia exporting and importing, how much crude oil are we producing compared to how much gasoline are we refining it into, things of that nature. All of that information you can find through the Energy Information Administration at EIA.gov. There's also some great industry publications where oil and gas industry professionals talk about their industry and what's going on in their industry to help get their own companies ready for what's coming next. And some of the best of those are the Oil and Gas Journal, which was established in 1905. That's a fantastic long-term U.S. oil industry journal. And then I also there was a great write-up about the OPEC Plus deal and its specific terms and Trump's really excellent work negotiating it. That you can find that article in the Journal of Petroleum Technology. There's also a great book about the history of the oil industry, all the way back from its beginnings in the 1850s, a little bit before the U.S. Civil War, back when it was still called rock oil, because if you said oil, people mostly thought whale oil. But gradually, it talks about how the Middle East got involved and how colonialism made a giant mess of all of the Middle East and turned it into a chaos, but also the goal of making people's lives easier by making energy easily accessible. It's called The Prize by Daniel Yergin. That is a fantastic book that I highly recommend. And if you're looking for more like a social media creator who's an oil and gas expert who can talk to you about current events and can answer your questions, he's actually answered a couple of my questions directly, which is awesome. His name is Matt Randolph, but he's better known as Mr. Global. You can find him on YouTube, just search for Mr. Global. You can find him on TikTok, that's where he got his start on social media. On TikTok, there's a million fake accounts pretending to be him. So you're looking for Mr. Global 2, T-O-O. That is the account. It's at Mr. Global 2. He is fantastic. He's got excellent expertise on it. He's a CEO of his own private oil company, and he also seems to be a contractor for Shell. He's just a fantastic expert that really makes clear all of the details of what's going on. So with those sources, I think you can get a really good picture of what's going on in the oil and gas industry. I hope this summary helped you out, and I will see you in the next video.